When you're vegan, you transform, but not into a carrot. Maybe a better person? The psychological aspects of going vegan, and the new book, The Vegan Transformation. Next on the PETA Podcast with Emil Guillermo. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On this episode of the PETA Podcast, the psychological impacts of going vegan. Angela Crawford's new book surveyed about 350 people, then followed up with 75 of them to find out how veganism changed them spiritually, mentally, physically. It's the vegan transformation. That's her book. Here's part one of our conversation on the PETA Podcast with Emil Guillermo. You wrote the book. I didn't read the book, but I that's the Larry King approach. I have questions. You have answers, right? I mean, presumably.
I hope.
Yeah. So tell me about your background. What you're a psychologist.
I was until like a couple of years ago working as a psychotherapist. I did that for 25 years, but my passion for veganism and just feeling that bringing the psychology into veganism, because I feel like sometimes that's overlooked, both whether someone's coming at this more from the ethical standpoint and or, also those coming at it more from a health standpoint, just our psychology and our social backgrounds can get in the way sometimes, of people. They find the biggest reason, for example, people don't stay vegan is our social reasons. And so
there is a psychological aspect in, are you ready to take on the mental part of veganism? Because it requires a kind of strength.
It does. And are you okay with being different? Because you have to be willing to be different because it's still not the norm, quote unquote, even though we wish it was.
Right. But there is something to that. The idea that, I'm going to go vegan. And then they do. And then they struggle. And then they realize, there's more to it than just the food. There's more to this than I'm going to eat carrots and celery until noon. And then I'm going to have a vegan burger. And, there's no vegan burgers there. I prefer the beyond to the impossible. I can't do that. Maybe I'll, do fish.
Yeah, it does take a commitment. And I guess the other thing is that I wanted to share the psychological benefits of the lifestyle because, again, like many of us are aware of other benefits, like, that it can help our health and it's certainly kinder to all sentient beings. But how do we actually emotionally change when we honor our values and our compassion?
So you're saying you could be a better person. You're a better person.
And you can be more fulfilled. It's not like a deprivation.
Oh, wait a minute. More fulfilled without eating meat? That sounds like, an oxymoron. I'm fulfilled and I'm not a meat eater.
Hard to believe, but
that is the psychological thing that I think most people, you're right, they just overlook that. And even the psychologists and the psychotherapists, they'll wait for people to come to the couch and say, I got this problem, doc. And it goes like this. My mother was a meat eater and she made me a meat eater. And now I don't want to be a meat eater. Help me.
That's right.
I didn't, what are the edible complexities here? Tell me. Or I just want to eat. I don't want to be edible. I want to eat. So psychology, there was more to it than you thought. I mean, had you heard people talk about the psychological aspects of being vegan before?
Not a lot. I, of course, knew Dr. Melanie Joy's work and, helping to understand about carnism and why we keep eating meat, even though we're most of us compassionate people. And then Claire Mann, who wrote the book Dystopia, The Anguish of Being Vegan in a Non-Vegan World. I knew their work, but I hadn't heard much about the benefits, so I thought that was a new angle to kind of share this lifestyle. And as I interviewed people, it was just inspiring to hear how when we honor compassion, that true compassion that most of us really have, it actually makes our life bigger and fuller
But
and better.
that is something, though, that it is a dystopic kind of relationship to life. I mean, that we don't fit. And so other people experience dystopia. Vegans are no different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for some vegans, it's challenging because, yeah, you're aware of suffering that other people we've have learned to compartmentalize and not see, and so now as a vegan, you're facing that. You're acknowledging it. So.
And you're saying that I'm not going to participate, or I'm going to make it
Mhm.
better. I'm going to be,
Mhm.
and as you go up on your high horse, people want to knock you down, and then you realize, oh, I don't know if I want to be this high up on the horse. I'll just
Yeah.
walk along with it.
Well, one thing that's been very cool since I've written the book is like some people in my circle, I'm a fairly new vegan, even though I became vegetarian in 2007. I became vegan only in 2019. And so as I've shared the book with people in my network who are not vegan, but are, sort of curious
Mm.
because they see how it's changed my life, I've had a few people say, hey, I'm starting to think more seriously about it after starting to read your book. And several are reading it. And so I think like it does have a non-judgmental and an inviting approach that I hope can be inviting to pre-vegans as well as those already on the vegan journey.
Yeah. So a young vegan, you don't look like a young vegan. You look like you've been at it a while, but do you find that people try to pull rank on you? Like, oh, I've been vegan since the '80s. Come on,
No, people, I find, I don't know. I know there can be in groups and all that in veganism, but for the most part, the people I've connected with, it's just we share these values and this compassion, and it's people are very supportive.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Whenever you come along the road, if you're on the right path, I think people who've been on there long enough, they don't necessarily have more wisdom. They might have more experience, saying, "Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
you'll get off that fake meat bandwagon soon enough, and go to more to vegetables, or you'll be juicing soon, or you'll be." Just eating raw instead of cooking.
Mhm.
There's that. But what do you find when you talk to people about the why they went there? That's usually the common thread. They want to do something to better a situation for animals, right? Isn't that usually why people turn to veganism? Is that what you found?
Yeah, I would say the majority of the people I interviewed for my book, that was the reason they gave for going vegan, was something awakened them to the suffering of animals and wanting to make a difference. I will say that there were some people I interviewed that became vegan more for health reasons, but as they were no longer eating animals, it awakened them to compassion for all sentient beings. It was sort of like whatever blocks or blinders they might have had before when eating an animal based diet, now that they weren't eating animals, it suddenly allowed them to begin to consider how animals are raised and the whole process of animal agriculture. So I found that it went both ways. But you're right, the majority did move in that direction more for reasons of compassion.
And so that is the transformation. That's people become non-thinkers to thinkers, or they become, there's room for compassion in this area that I never thought compassion was possible in my bowl of spaghetti and meatballs. Now vegan meatballs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
transformation, that's what you hit on. That's what your book is about.
Yeah. For me personally, when I became first vegetarian, which was for ethical reasons, but over time realized that I needed to be fully vegan to honor my ethics more deeply, I experienced transformations. I have always been a somewhat shy, reserved, introverted person. And suddenly I found myself creating a website, having a blog, writing about the psychological aspects of thriving with a vegan lifestyle and making the transition. And then other ways, I was not a cook before I became vegan or vegetarian. And once I moved to a plant-based lifestyle and then fully vegan lifestyle, it's just like now cooking is part of my life. I enjoy cooking. I like sharing food with other people because often that's what opens people up to realize that plant-based vegan eating can be delicious. And just other ways. I've always been a compassionate person. As a psychotherapist for 25 years, that involves a lot of compassion for people and their journeys. And I've always loved animals, but somehow I had a block there. And so as I went on the journey that opened my eyes to animal agriculture and other industries, I just, my compassion expanded, I guess. Before it was compartmentalized to certain groups or certain species of animals. And then suddenly it was just like, I don't know, just something really changed inside. So my own transformation made me want to explore, did other people have these inner psychological and emotional shifts? And that led to me doing research and writing a book.
Yeah. And before you get to the other people, what were the blocks in you that were moved out of the way? What was the stone that was rolled away and allowed you to transform?
Yeah, it's interesting. I became vegetarian first because I'd seen a program about workers in a meat processing plant, and that just opened my eyes to animal agriculture in general. And very quickly, after I felt empathy for the workers who were having a lot of injuries and seemed like pretty horrific work environment, I then quickly thought, well, if you don't like what's happening with the workers, what do you think is happening with the animals? And just sort of like blinders that had been there were just suddenly lifted. And all of a sudden, at age, I was 40 at that time. What made me suddenly awaken then and see it when I hadn't my whole life, but something did. And once I did, I wanted to read everything. I wanted to learn as much as I could. I read a lot of the books like John Robbins' books, Diet for a New America, all of that. So, so part of it was just, I think, the societal blinders that a lot of us have, where we're raised to believe eating meat is natural, normal, and necessary. And so I think that was one block that was there. I'd always believed that I needed to eat it to be healthy and to survive, even though I just felt it was kind of unpleasant in a way to handle it in cooking and stuff. I think other blinders, then once I started to understand more about it, were the social aspects. You have to be willing to handle social situations and be the odd one out, if you will. And so it took me working through, I guess, I hadn't realized I was a people pleaser, but there was some part of me, I guess, that just wanted to kind of harmonize in social situations rather than be different, even though I was also very independent. So I had to work through that inner conflict, I guess you'd say, and finally just say to myself, with what I understand now, I can't eat this way, and I just need to learn how to navigate social situations being different and being prepared and being proactive and speaking up.
Right. And so the first Thanksgiving dinner, I'm not going to have that turkey, right? That's usually the first time that people have that confrontation with the family that, oh, well, you always used to take the wishbone and, want to split it up. You always used to want to get the drumstick or the wing or not this time. I brought my own roast, right? I mean, you probably had an experience like that. I mean, most people do, right?
Yes, I started just bringing food with me to events like that. And, fortunately, I had never been the one to make the turkey, so I wasn't even having to deal with any of that. But it just, when I went to my in-laws or other people's place for Thanksgiving, just bringing lots of side dishes that I could enjoy. So
right, you become the side person. Oh yeah, she's got the potatoes and the salad and the vegetables. Oh, we'll eat the meat. What I hate is things like the ticket splitting, right? Everyone is a meat eater except you, and they still want to split the ticket, and you get the penalty, the vegan penalty, or the.
I have had that happen many times, where my meal is like a third of the price or something of everybody else's. And yes, it's like
we're going to be equal. We're going to be equal. And then how about the people who say to you, Oh, you're vegan. You're virtue signaling. Now, I never really heard that until like within the last couple of years. Suddenly, people are talking about virtue signaling. I'm not signaling anything, but maybe I'm virtuous. Maybe, maybe I am. Maybe I'm just trying to be good for a change.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard of that term, but I've not heard it directly
Oh,
towards myself.
yeah. Well, all right. So people, you talked, you remove the blocks, you transformed, you become a better vegan, you get deeper into veganism. What did you find about other people's pathways and how they transformed and became either deeper, maybe more radical, maybe they just became better cooks? I don't know. Maybe it's just a matter, oh, my food is more delicious than your crappy food.
Well, I surveyed about 350 vegans and then followed up with 75 in-depth interviews. And, basically, I'd read a lot about many people with a vegan lifestyle have physical healings, especially if they're eating the healthier whole food version of a plant-based vegan diet. But there'd been less about how are we affected psychologically and emotionally when we choose to align with our compassion through our food and other choices. And as I interviewed people and read their survey responses, what I found there were, 7 key themes that came through of ways that people transformed internally. Some of those included finally having the courage to truly align with their deepest values. Most of us hold compassion, for example, as a value, but yet we're still eating animals, even though they find in surveys that 90% or more of people want animals to be treated compassionately, and yet we're eating them. And so when you make that vegan transition, now I'm being more true to these values. There's a peace that comes with that. There's an inner fulfillment that often we don't really think about because in our culture, we don't talk a lot about values and are you living aligned with your values? But yet, a lot of times when we're not feeling at peace, it's because something's out of sync with our values. So the people I interviewed found an inner peace from truly living their values through a vegan lifestyle.
And if you don't do that, you remain in conflict. I mean, that's the implication, right? And when you're in conflict, then you go call your psychotherapist.
I think that conflict is often unconscious, but I think it still affects us just the same. Several people said to me something along the lines of a weight was lifted that I didn't know was there before. So something didn't feel right before, but people were very good at disconnecting sometimes or not seeing things, compartmentalizing. But when we break through that, there is a peace that comes with that. I think sometimes we think it's going to be too hard. And yet what I found through my own life and through the people I interviewed is often it just ended up being so fulfilling and freeing, actually. There were more food choices than we ever imagined. And I personally eat way more variety than I ever did before I was vegetarian or vegan. And there's other changes, though, too, not just the food, but just an expansion in what you're willing to see. For example, one other transformation that came through a lot that I wasn't expecting is many people said to me, I realize I'm more interconnected with nature and life and all sentient beings than I had realized before. It was sort of a spiritual thing almost. Like now that I'm not eating animals and I'm not eating the violence that comes with eating animals, I feel lighter, more in touch with my intuition, more connected to the natural world. So these were some of the things that came up that I wasn't really expecting people to report, but that came through the surveys and interviews.
So you were talking about the violence and the production of meat. I mean, and you talked about seeing a documentary, seeing a program, and it's usually, like the Upton Sinclair sort of thing. This is how meat has always been processed. Do you find that people were just needed to be educated, that people were just in the dark about how these things, I mean, because there are things like ag-gag laws that prevent people from knowing what goes on behind, the slaughterhouse doors. But and most people just go along, it's almost like a conformity. to this is the way society does it. Just shut up. It's almost like an authoritarian way of going about your life in terms of the food we eat and what the good food is and what the bad food is. You will listen. Were people rebelling against that?
Yeah. Yeah, there is so much messaging out about exactly what you're saying from all of our authority figures, if you will, from the medical profession often to government agencies to what we read to the media and also a lot of misinformation out there, about veganism or other forms of, diets, that you need meat or and it's just, I don't know exactly what helps to break through for us. I think information is part of it, but I don't think it's the whole picture because many of us have had the experience of presenting information to people and it just landing on deaf ears or the person being, "Don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal." So I do think information is part of it, but I think there's more to it, that somehow it has to land in a way that touches our heart or touches us in some way that it breaks through all those years of conditioning and messaging that we've received. And we're willing to look at things differently and realize that, some of what we've been told isn't true. I I can actually thrive without eating animals. I can actually thrive on a solely plant-based diet. And it's so aligned with so many things that I care about when I'm willing to look at it.
Yeah, and yet even when you get to a point where, yeah, I'm fine with veganism, I can eat this way, there are all these temptations. Eve is always with the apple, or always with the burger, or the
Mhm.
or the ribeye steak, and that then goes back into the conflict, and then people give up. And what's the psychological aspect of what's at play there psychologically that you discovered in your interviews? Or does it
Yeah.
come up? Does it come up that people get tempted? What makes them go deeper to get past the temptation?
Yeah. I think there's two parts to what you're saying. One is that we do need to have a strong why, which is sort of our motivations for change, something that really lands for us. And even though veganism is at its heart an ethical lifestyle, people do enter the door through other ways and sometimes come to that ethical place once they've entered the door. Even if it's first for the planet or for their health, they then can start to realize all the reasons. And I think, having a strong why and sometimes having more than one. And they do find that often if you have through research, more than one reason, and that reason involves something beyond yourself, it helps to have a greater, I don't know, impact on us to stick with this. So that is one aspect, is our strong why. And then I think the other is that we do need to have a how that is doable for us. There needs to be a path to this lifestyle that feels doable, because if it feels like, oh, this, there's no way I can do this, or I have to be perfect, or I just don't know what options there are, then that can deter people from opening their hearts. So I do think both aspects are important. And so all the people that teach the how, that's really important, like how to cook, how to
Yeah.
find plant-based foods, how to do this in a way that, is very manageable. And I think that's one great thing, for example, that PETA and your magazine offers, is it gives some of those tools that make this lifestyle doable.
Yeah, and so I sort of cut you off at you gave two things. Go over the other five, the top seven things that you found, just so
Oh,
we
sure.
highlight the findings of this survey of vegans, because it's not a normal thing to hear every day. Someone's surveying vegans, although sometimes people find, oh, they're not really vegan all the time. Sometimes they cheat. Sometimes, what are you finding?
Yeah, I didn't get so much at that part of what you're talking about of whether we're perfect, although just to say something about that,
Yeah, please.
sometimes that can be, from the research I've read, a deterrent for people if they feel like they can't have a setback, because in the change process of any change, humans have setbacks. So I think for us supporting other people on their vegan journey, it's important to normalize that there could be a setback that the person could have, like they're at a party and someone pressures them and they eat something they didn't plan to. Pick yourself up and just move forward. You're not kicked out of the vegan club because you messed up. Just keep moving forward, learn from it, be prepared the next time. I do want to throw that in there because in my work as a psychotherapist that I did previously for many years, that's the biggest deterrent to any change is if we think we have to be perfect and then when we have a setback, we give up. So just want to normalize it.
And that's a good point because I like to be Father Emil. You can confess to me your vegan sins and I will bless you and you can go off, pick yourself up, your penance, eat 5 carrots and 5 celery.
I love that.
Yeah. So
just learn from it because every time we have a setback, like early on my vegan journey when I would show up at an event and maybe I wasn't prepared by, I hadn't told the host, for example, and maybe there's nothing there to eat. I learned from that. Next time I told the host or I brought food or, so can we learn from the tough spots we have?
Dr. Angela Crawford, her new book, The Vegan Transformation. And she went over 2 of her 7 big findings. We'll go into the other 5 of her findings in part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Crawford, Ph.D. Interesting, right? The guilt parts, the perfection, the people-pleasing parts, an aspect that people don't usually talk about when they talk about going vegan. But we know you don't have to be perfect to be a vegan. In fact, you can confess to Father Emil anytime right here on the PETA Podcast. Anyway, that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of the show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on X or Twitter, if you will, at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or see me at AMOK.com, or you can find this podcast on YouTube at Emil Amok1. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music, and that's them in the background, provided by Carbonworks. That's Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time. We'll have part 2 of the vegan transformation. How will we transform? Just by going vegan. It happens. Anyway, join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.